What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm at Borgata, it's Friday night, ready to play some 2-5. It is packed, so I won't make this intro too long because I want to get on the tables. But listen, if you haven't already, please make sure to like and subscribe. Helps the channel out a ton, helps me make more videos, more hands, more poker. That's what everyone wants. And speaking of which, let's get started. Let's get to those hands. Let's go. We start things off in the big blind and look down at pocket threes. It folds all the way around to the small blind, who raises to $15. Let's go set mining. I make the call, and we're heads up to a flop. We're heads up to a flop of 10, 8, 3, 2 spades, and we've struck gold early in this one. Small blind continues for $15. In position, nothing to do here but call. I don't want to blow our opponent off this board just yet. I make the call, and the turn comes the 5 of clubs. Our opponent now slows down and checks, but there will be no free river cards on this one. I bet out $35, which does feel a little bit small, but this is a small pot. You have to remember it was limped beforehand, so this is slightly over 50% sizing. The small blind makes the call, and we're off to a river, which comes the king of spades. The small blind checks, and when the flush comes in, I don't think we're going to get called by anything worse. There is some chance our opponent could have some kind of 2 pair, like 10-8 or King 10, but I don't think you would check that on the turn, so we're either way ahead or way behind here. I check back, and we win against Ace 8 of hearts. Not the biggest pot, but always good for the confidence to start the session off with a win. In our next hand, we look down at Ace 10 of diamonds under the gun +1. There's a straddle on for $10. I make the call, and it gets all the way around to the big blind, who shoves for a small stack of only $58. We've under-repped our hand to this point, and he has such a short stack that he could really be shoving with anything here. I make the call, and we hold against 9-8 of clubs. Nice. In this one, we look down at the old Jack 8 suited on the button. Under the gun opens to $20. The hijack and the cutoff make the call. This would be a good spot to raise in, but I don't mind mixing in some calls as well. I make the call, and we're off to a flop of Queen 10-5, rainbow with the Queen of diamonds. It checks to the cutoff, who bets out $20. We have a gut shot and backdoor diamonds, pretty easy call. The hijack calls as well, and we're 3 ways to a turn. The turn comes the Jack of spades. It checks to the cutoff, who once again bets out $20. This is where I make, in my opinion, a big mistake by just calling in this spot. This is a very clear raise spot, and it should have been something like $100. However, in real time, I make the call, and the hijack comes along as well. The river is a 6 of clubs. It checks to me, and I'll be honest, my line of thinking has been a little bit off the entire time in this hand. I felt like there was a decent chance one of these guys has just a queen and wants to get the showdown, which is entirely possible, but I really think looking back, I should have just checked, taken our jack to showdown, and had a decent chance to win there. If not, we've only invested $60. However, my journey to mess this hand up as much as possible continues, and I bet out $75. The hijack very quickly raises to $225, and the cutoff folds. And now we are in a terrible spot. What hand could our opponent have here that he just check-called every single street, and then checked the river, risking it checking all the way through, that he suddenly has a monster now? I don't know. I really don't believe this raise at all, but the problem is he could be bluffing with better. Something like a jack with a better kicker, or queen that maybe doesn't believe us. Generally, as you guys should know by now, when I'm in a spot like this and the action doesn't make any sense, I tend to put more money in. However, this time around, I take the safer route and fold. Being able to bet fold is a move that has to be in our arsenal. You have to be able to throw a bet out there, and then if you get raised and put in a bad spot, be willing to fold. I asked this guy 2 hours later as he was leaving the table if he remembered this hand and if he could recall what he had. He looked at me, gave me a smile, and said, "Oh, I absolutely remember. Pure air." Then he turned and walked off into the metaphorical sunset. I knew it. Oh, I'm very upset with myself in this spot. Knowing that he had nothing definitely put me on tilt a little bit, especially because my gut told me and I didn't listen to it. A little bit tilting, but at the end of the day, I do think it was kind of a crazy raise on our opponent's part. So more often than not, when you are in these spots, they will have it. This time, however, you got me good. Well played, sir. Well played. In our next hand, we look down at Ace Jack offsuit in middle position. The straddle is on, I limp in middle position, and it gets around to the small blind, who raises up to $30. The big blind and straddle are both call, and once again, we find ourselves in a decent squeeze spot, but man, do I just hate Ace Jack. I think I'd get a lot of credit here with the limp re-raise, but in this instance, I do decide to go with just a call as we are closing the action, and we'll get to see a flop for pretty cheap. The flop comes King, King 6, and it checks around. The turn is the 10 of hearts, and now the small blind leads out for $25. The big blind calls, the straddler calls. Once again, we are closing the action here and have improved to a gut shot. I make the call. Plus, we do have 2 overs to the 10, which is one of the most likely holdings for our opponents to have here. It's unlikely that a king would check flop and then just call the turn multi-way, so I really don't think any of these guys can have a king except maybe the small blind. I make the call, and we're off to a very interesting river, the jack of clubs. Now the small blind checks, so we can rule out him having a king, but the big blind decides to bet out $75. Straddler folds, and it's on me. I think we have a very easy, straightforward call here. We have the best jack, and a king seems unlikely. There's some chance we're up against ace-queen, but we block that with the ace in our hand, and I don't think queen-9 makes it to this point. I make the call, the small blind snap folds, and we get shown king-6 for the flopped boat. That's a very interesting way to play king-6 when you flop a boat. I can understand the check on the flop, but the smooth call on the turn multi-way really threw me off. Gotta admit, they're getting me tonight so far. In this one, I look down at the beautiful 10-8 of diamonds in the big blind. It's a 3-way limped pot pre. Gets to me in the big blind, I make the check, and we're 3 ways to a flop of queen or 3, 2 diamonds. Small blind checks to me, and with a flush draw, I'd like to start building a pot here. I bet out $15. Both under the gun and the small blind call. The turn is a very nice card, the king of diamonds. Gotta love getting there right away, not having to sweat all the way to the river. Small blind checks again, and I bet out $35. Usually I like to go a little bit bigger multi-way, but once again, this was a limped pot pre-flop, and any bigger I think would be a little bit too suspicious at this point. However, once again, both players make the call. The river comes the 4 of clubs. While I don't love the board pairing, there's no straight out there, and a bigger flush or a set would have very likely raised the turn, so I'm not afraid of running into a boat here. If we do end up getting raised, it'll be a gross spot, but I do not anticipate folding. I bet out $85. Under the gun quickly folds, the small blind makes the call, I table our hand, and we're good. Our opponent mucks, and we take this one down. We finally win a good one here to get a little bit of momentum back. In our next hand, we look down at king-queen in the small blind. There's a middle position open to $20. I make the call, the big blind calls, and we're 3 ways to a very interesting flop, ace, king, queen, all diamonds. Now, I don't want to donk out in this situation, but if anyone bets, we will absolutely be check raising. I check, the big blind checks, and middle position continues for $25. I stick to the plan and immediately raise things up to 90, and both of our opponents fold. If we were faced with a call, I was prepared to fire big on any turn that's not a diamond, not a jack, or not a 10, but luckily, it doesn't come to that, and we take this one down with relative ease. For our next adventure, I look down at 8-7 suited, middle position. I make the call, and the hijack opens to 20. Cutoff and big blind come along. Once again, I'm closing the action, I make the call, and we are 4 ways to a pretty great looking board, 9-7-6. 2 hearts, 1 spade. It checks to the hijack, who now continues for $55. The cutoff folds, the big blind calls. Once again, I think I make a little bit of a mistake here by just calling. I don't mind calling every now and then, but I do think in this specific spot, with all the equity we have, a raise would have been better to get this hand heads up, or possibly just take it down now. Either way, I just call, and we're off to a turn which comes the queen of hearts. The big blind checks. Now, listen guys, I'll never claim to be a GTO wizard, but I do try to play as best I can in every situation. I must admit though, I am much more of a feel player. It's hard to describe what that feeling is, but if you've ever played poker, you know what I'm about to describe. It's that feeling in your gut when you just know that your opponents either have it or don't have it. There may not be a logic-based reason why, but after you sat at the table for long enough, observed the players, sometimes you can just tell. When the front door flush comes in, I could just tell neither of these guys have hearts. I can't really describe why, but I get a feeling that I should go for it and rep the hearts in this spot. The way I've played this hand so far, I can absolutely have hearts, and if these guys don't have it, I think we can just take this one down here. I bet out $100. However, apparently no one told the hijack this, as he quickly raises to $225. The big blind folds, and now the action is back to me. I gotta be honest guys, I don't believe this play at all. The hijack was the pre-flop aggressor and continued on the flop. It is much less likely for him to have hearts in this situation than it is for me as the caller in both of those instances. If the big blind or myself had been the aggressor and suddenly the hijack wakes up when the hearts come in with this raise, it would be a very, very different story. I think this player has either pure air or possibly just a queen and is trying to scare away any draws on this draw heavy board. I take a look at his stack, he only has about 500 left, and I do consider just jamming in this spot. But if he does have pure air like ace king, ace jack, ace 10, if he has 1 heart, we may get called here and have to sweat out a river. If he has a queen, he might call us here as well. So it's a tough spot, but I still don't believe this guy and we don't yet have to jam. I decide instead to make the call, evaluate a river, and jam on pretty much any non-heart. The river does come a non-heart, but it's a super gross card, the queen of spades. I tank for a long time here, and I gotta be honest, I really hate the situation as one of the hands I put him on was just a naked queen. Now this queen coming on the river does make it less likely for our opponent to have one, but if he does, we're never getting him off this hand. After a long while of weighing my options, I decide to just check, as there is still some chance we are ahead here if we were against ace-king, ace-jack, or like a tiny pocket pair. Our opponent quickly checks back and tables 9-7 of diamonds. As soon as I see his hand, my heart sinks, as that's the exact sort of hand that a shove would have gotten a fold from. And I chickened out in a spot where I listened to my gut on the turn, but didn't listen to it and got scared on the river. This one hurts, as I knew the right play and just didn't make it. We cannot play scared, guys. That is such an easy way to go broke. We lose this hand in spectacular fashion. In our next hand, we once again look down at ace-jack offsuit, this time on the button. Under the gun opens to $20, middle position calls, and this time I do elect to go for the raise rather than just the call. I raise it up to 90, only under the gun calls, and we're heads up to 10-6-5, 2 hearts. Under the gun checks, I continue for $65. He makes the call pretty quickly, so we do have to be careful here. The turn is the queen of hearts, and under the gun snap checks. This is a very interesting card, as we've suddenly improved to quite the combo draw. Something about the way our opponent quickly called the flop and snap checked the turn though does have my guard up. In almost every other instance with this kind of combo draw, I would continue here, but for some reason my spidey senses are tingling and I'm a little concerned, so I check this one back. We still have a lot of cards that can help us on the river, and if we hit, we will certainly fire out. If we miss and our opponent checks to us, once again, I will fire out, as if he did have something strong, I don't think he would check the river again. If we had bet out on the turn and faced a raise, it would have been a nasty spot, so I actually like my play to slow down and check there. The river comes the 8 of clubs. Under the gun checks once again, and I can't see him doing that with a flush, even a small one. The only straights that come in are jack 9 or 9-7, and we block jack 9. Once again though, I don't see any flush or straight checking this river, so I feel that we have the green light to bet. I decide to go for it and bet out $135. My heart is beating a mile a minute here throwing this bluff out there, but I don't see what he would reasonably have to make this call. No straight, no flush, and even if he has 2 pair, it's a really tough spot to be put in. Eventually, after quite a while of thinking, our opponent does reach for chips and make the call. I tell our opponent he's good, and he owns my soul when he turns over 10-7 offsuit. Wow. I have very mixed feelings on this one, as my assessment of the situation was correct. Our opponent did not have a straight or a flush. He had the exact kind of hand that I felt a river bet should get a fold out of. Yet he didn't fold, he stuck around, made the call, and got me good. I do think most of the time this play gets through, but I make a mental note that this guy is very sticky, and that information will come into play very, very soon. And by very soon, I mean only a few hands later. At this point, we're playing four-handed, waiting for new players to come to our table when I look down at king 3 of diamonds on the button. Short-handed, we're going to be playing a much wider range, and a suited king on the button certainly falls into that category. Our lovely friend from the last hand is under the gun and opens to $15. I make the call, the blinds fold, and we're heads up to a flop that I haven't seen since the George Clooney classic in '99, 3 kings. Well, we're very likely ahead at this point, so that's a relief. Our opponent bets again, this time for $25. I'm very, very tempted to raise this specific opponent, but we're probably ahead, right? So I just make the call and hope that our opponent can catch something on a later street. The turn comes the 10 of spades. Once again, our very sticky friend bets out, this time for $75. This is fantastic news. Our opponent is betting just about a full pot size bet. There's no chance we can lose this hand. I make the call, hoping he'll continue firing again on the river. The river comes the jack of hearts, and my wish is granted when our opponent bets out $250. At this point, I only have about 400 or so left in my stack, and there is only one move to make, but we can't look too eager. So I do Hollywood for a little bit, I shuffle some chips around, I check my cards twice before finally announcing all in. Our opponent snap calls, and I happily show him the bad news. He is pretty stunned in this spot, which is understandable, and gives me the nice slow play before mucking his cards. I've certainly had my share of run bad recently, but it is nice to once in a while flop the super nuts and get a full double up. In the next one, we're in the big blind and look down at the beautiful 10-5 offsuit, a hand all poker players love to see. There's a straddle on, and the entire table calls. I had fully intended to fold this hand, but when it gets to me in the big blind for only $5 more, I figure why not. The straddler checks, and we are 8 ways to a flop of ace 5 deuce, 2 clubs. We have second pair, but a terrible kicker, no backdoor draws. For $5 more, it was certainly worth it to see the flop, but we will be folding to any bet at this point. Surprisingly, however, it checks all the way around, and we see an amazing turn card, the 5 of hearts. I check once again, hoping that someone who has an ace and was a little skittish on the flop has to go for it here. Under the gun +1 obliges and bets out $20. The cutoff calls, and then the small blind raises to 75. I consider raising, but in an 8-way limped pot, this guy could have anything, and if we were to face a 4-bet, it would be a nasty, nasty spot. I make the call, and the other 2 players fold. We're now heads up to the river, which comes another miraculous card, the 10 of clubs. Small blind bets out $125, and any concerns we had on the turn have completely evaporated and have now been replaced by trying to figure out how to get max value. We both have between 600 and 800 or so left in our stacks roughly, so an all-in would be a little bit too large of a size. I put the small blind on a 5 of some sort, possibly a flush. Very unlikely to have ace 5 or deuce 5, as I don't think those hands would have been able to check twice. When figuring out our size, we have to target flushes or 5s because anything else is going to fold anyway. I finally settle on a size of $350. The small blind is immediately uncomfortable and goes deep in the tank for quite a while. A few minutes pass, it's very obvious he's not going to raise, he's considering whether to call or fold. After a while, I'm praying for the call, but unfortunately, the small blind flashes a 5 and folds. A bit disappointing not to get the call here, but I gotta give him credit for a great fold. And honestly, we really can't be too upset considering I was going to fold this hand pre-flop anyway and only came along because the entire table called. We rake in a good one here and are once again back on track. For our last hand of the evening, I look down at a fun one, ace king of hearts under the gun. I opened $20. It folds all the way around to the big blind, who was our opponent from the prior hand, who now 3-bets up to $65. We're already heads up at this point and in position with some very powerful cards. I think a 4-bet is in order. Take a quick look at our opponent's stack. He only has about $560 left. I decide to 4-bet to 225, which is a size that I think will either induce an all-in or just fold out any bluffs he may have. We block aces, we block kings, and I'd be totally fine getting it in against queens or worse. The big blind thinks for a little while and shoves. Even though this is what I wanted, it's still a little bit scary to see a 5-bet shove heads up, but I do make the call. We are running this one time, and I ask our opponent if he has aces or kings. He says no, to which I say, oh, okay, we probably have the same hand then. I table my hand, and he pretty quickly looks upset about the situation, which is a little confusing to me because even queens, jacks, 10s are in a pretty good spot, and then he turns his hand over and I understand the reason why. We are up against ace queen offsuit and have a hammerlock on this hand when the flop comes ace king 4. The run out is clean, and we hold for a very nice win, getting the rest of the chips that I had been targeting in the prior hand. They just took a little bit longer to get here. Not exactly sure what my opponent was thinking in that spot with ace queen offsuit. I think maybe he had just had enough of me. Maybe he didn't want to play ace queen out of position. I can surely understand that and hoped that I would fold to his shove. But in this instance, we had the goods and we took it down. After this, I play a little bit longer, but nothing too exciting happens. I rack up a good win and head out for the night. That's all for this one, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Solid session, played for a little over 4 hours, had a lot of hands in a short period of time. Very, very happy about the ace king versus ace queen hand. Still, it was a little bit tough of a call facing a 5-bet. The hand I really wish I could have back was the 7-8 hand early on. I knew he didn't have the flush, and I should have trusted my gut. Went all in on the river, he would have folded, and we would be up significantly more. But, butterfly effect, the rest of the session may not have gone the way it did, and I'm very happy with the way the rest of the session went, so I guess it all works out in the end. Numbers here. Played for a little over 4 hours, in for 1,000, out for 1,800. Small win, but we'll take it. Very happy with the results. Thanks so much for watching. If you stuck around this far, you are the real heroes. Good luck out there, guys. See you next time.